In The Sick Rose, he is no longer dealing with sort of the outrages and crimes and disharmonies of society, but dealing with something that was very, very important to him. Blake's feeling was that the greatest powers that existed were the creative powers. Now, it can either be imaginative and intellectual and artistic creation, in which case the power you're talking about is the human mind, especially the human imagination. Or it could be natural creation, in which case sexuality obviously becomes very important, because the physical creation is the result of sexual impulse, sexual desire, and the imaginative creation is the result of a free and creative imagination. In the Songs of Experience, what he always shows is a society and a culture that tries to repress and to deny every form of energy. In other words, what I'm getting at here is that the world of experience is the modern world of London, the modern world of England, the modern world of Europe. And for Blake, what that is a world that is constantly repressing every form of creative energy that it can, trying to keep it in check, trying to bind it down, trying to rule over it, trying to tyrannize over it. And so what you get are two crucial forms of energy, the imaginative creative energy and the sexual creative energy being distorted, warped, repressed, whatever it may be. Now, which of those does, well, in fact, what does The Sick Rose deal with? This is, as I've said at the beginning of this class, that Blake is a profoundly symbolic poet. This is perhaps as purely symbolic as anything he would ever write. He starts out, "O rose, thou art sick." Is this an ortho commercial? You know what I mean, ortho. You know, where your rose bush is sick, all you need to do is get this stuff here and put it on your Japanese beetles and it'll get rid of that blight and you'll be ready to go right up. Is it an ortho commercial? No, you know very well it is not. The invisible worm that flies in the night, in the howling storm. How are we doing? One thing is sure. If this is a literal rose and a literal worm and a literal night and a literal storm, what the devil's going on? Who knows? So when you cannot arrive, and you cannot arrive at any meaningful, literal meaning, what are you forced to do? That's what Blake wants you to do. Start asking yourself, okay, if I don't really understand what's literally happening, and there's virtually no literal level in this poem, then where am I going to have to go? On some level, to a symbolic interpretation. Now, "O rose, thou art sick." What is the traditional association of rose? Poets, writers of any sort can use certain words, certain images that have traditional association. And that's what Blake is doing here. Yes, the rose is, for one thing, a flower, isn't it? And the flower, we learned, remember, in Botany 101 just a minute ago, is the sexual organ of plants. So there's that. But it is also associated with beauty. It is also associated in particular with feminine beauty and so forth. It is, when Robert Burns writes, "My love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June," he is using the typical sort of associations of the rose, isn't he? In what sense is his love like a red, red rose? Jeff Thorne? No. And the person who would ask that is imaginatively tone deaf, or perhaps even dead as a thumb. I don't know. But we know what it's basically meant, don't we? It communicates a sense of love and attachment, and it communicates also the sense that Robert Burns' beloved is obviously a beautiful thing, a beautiful presence. Blake knows those associations here. And so when he's talking about "O rose," now remember the imagery that we saw when we looked at the plate? Here it is. There's not only a rose there, but there are female figures, both on the plant, there are two of them there, and one coming out of the rose, down there. So if we had, this is the way Blake wanted us to read this, isn't it? He wanted us to see this, not what's in the Penguin paperback edition of English Romantic Poets. He wanted us to see this. And if we did, we would obviously, in some sense, the rose is associated with femininity, it's associated with the female, it's associated, with all of that. And how about the invisible worm? What might be the traditional symbolism of the worm? What is it often associated with? Yeah, death, for one thing. But it has other associations. Freud once said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. But then sometimes it isn't, right? And if the rose is a traditional female symbol, the worm is also frequently used as what is called, as I dare say many of you know, a phallic symbol. And so what do we got here? Two images that represent female and male sexuality on some level. But notice, this is the invisible worm. I can think of several paraphrases of that are pretty funny if you want to. You know, the blank that flies by night. I don't even think about it. Anyway, but that's exactly. Come on, don't be. Think about it. Use your imagination. Anyway, the invisible worm that flies when? In the night. See, I told you we're always in the night here. And what else has he done? In the Howling Storm. I believe there used to be a, maybe still is going, I don't know, a soap opera on television that was called The Secret Storm. Now, was that about a weather forecast? No, you know better than that. If we talk about stormy passion, or we talk about, in Dante's Divine Comedy, why is it that he puts the two lovers, Paolo and Francesca da Rimini, in a constant storm in hell that is dark and gloomy and all the rest, and they are tossed from, because in their lives they were tossed blindly by passion, and in hell they are eternally tossed by the dark storm of passion. Does it begin to make sense? We've got a rose that's sick. So what is the condition of female sexuality at this stage of things, in this point? Not good. How about male sexuality? The invisible worm. Why does it have to be invisible? Pardon? Sneaky. That's right, because are we ever open about it and honest about it? No, we have to. You know, we got to have V-chips, and I don't know what else. You know, anything. You know, I sometimes think the only thing virginal about us is our ears. You know, we don't want to hear about it. But of course, if there is a more thoroughly, sexually sort of dripping society than ours is, I'd like to meet it. Except we're not honest about it, are we? We use sex to sell everything, but only up to a point, you know. And then we, oh Lordy, gets awfully tiresome sometimes too. But the idea is, what happens to sexuality when it becomes something that has to be covered up, be ashamed of, treated as if it were sort of the unmentionable thing that we dare, you know, that dare not speak its name? It has to become sneaky, doesn't it? It has to become invisible. So the invisible, it doesn't mean literally invisible, it means it always appears in such a way as not to be seen. It's sneaking around, right? And what has it done? It flies in the night, and of course because there you can do things in secret at night. And what about the howling storm? The storm of passion, isn't it? The storm of sexual desire and all the rest. The sexual desire that is afraid. Sexual desire that dare not be open, dare not speak its name. And this worm has found out thy bed of crimson joy. Would that make it pretty clear that we're dealing with something fairly sensuous? Yeah, I think. I mean, do I have to go on? What's the traditional association of beds? You know, I mean, you sleep, right? But it's not just a bed, is it? It's a bed of crimson joy. Now, what happens when the rose and the worm come together in this secret storm, this dark night, this hidden bed and all the rest? And his dark, secret love does thy life destroy. Let me ask a simple question. Is this an anti-sex poem? Because the sexual union here certainly turns out to be destructive, doesn't it? O rose, thou art sick, and at the end, does thy life destroy? But what we have to do is look at every word, don't we? Does he say that its passion destroys you? He does not. Does he say its desire destroys you? He does not. Does he say, worse, that love destroys anybody? He does not. What he says is, his dark, secret love does thy life destroy. That is, when sexuality can no longer be honest, when it cannot be direct, when it cannot be regarded as a healthy reality, but must be hidden, we must feel guilt about it. we might got to keep it under wraps so that nobody catches us and all the rest. What happens then? Freud said it 100 years later and got credit for saying it. Blake said it 100 years earlier and didn't. But what would Freud say? If you are repressed, that is, you feel you have to be secretive, you have to be, it's dirty, I don't want to, and yet you're driven to it anyway, as virtually all of us are in one way or another, what will that result in? Sickness, illness, psychological illness, sometimes physical illness, sometimes sort of cultural illness. And if you don't believe me, think of it this way. A very wise man once said, where there is love without marriage, you may trust me. He said, there will be marriage without, where there's marriage without love, you may trust me, there will be love without marriage. Anyone know how many prostitutes there happen to be in the city of London at the time Blake's life? About 50,000. That's about one for every 6 people. They formed one of the biggest minorities in London at that time. Why? Because they were bad people and they went to see prostitutes on it. That's not it. What was marriage mostly about at the end of the 18th century? Remember what Jane Austen said? What's the beginning of Pride and Prejudice? It is a truth universally acknowledged that a man in possession of good fortune must be what? In want of a wife, or in need of a wife. Which is it? Is it want or need? It doesn't matter. It's the same thing, isn't it? In other words, what is marriage? Jane Austen knows this very well in the late 18th century. It is mainly a commercial enterprise. And when that's the case, what happens to sexual desire when it was just a sort of marriage of convenience? It seeks other outlets, doesn't it, as it were. And it becomes, and then you have things like, sexually transmitted diseases and promiscuity and zillions of prostitutes. In other words, when sex is repressed or when sex is made to go into the confines of basically a commercial institution, what happens? This is what happens. Disease happens. Psychological disease, physical disease, cultural disease, social disease. And that is, it's about repression and about the neuroses, personal and public, that happen. I would say that thousands of prostitutes in one city amounts to a form of social neurosis, to say the least of it, and other things as well. How much has he communicated in the 8 little short lines of that? If you analyzed all the ramifications of what he's saying and wrote about them, you could easily produce books and books and books. But it is the extreme condensation and symbolic power that Blake has command over as an artist that really makes him the remarkable writer that he is. We can see that as well in the next poem, which is probably his most famous single poem. And that, of course, is The Tiger.